special meeting of the Council of the City of Connersville is now in session. Please rise. We have a pledge of allegiance by Councilman Frank.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll have our invocation by Councilman Nutty.
Would you bow with me, please, in reverence to God? Our Heavenly Father, we do thank you that you bless us this day and safety and travel to this meeting, and that you give us opportunity to serve this community. We ask for your wisdom and discernment in all that we do, that what we do would be not only pleasing in your eyes, but what's best for the community of Connersville. And these things we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dave.
Okay, please silence your phones. We'll have roll call.
Councilman Nutty?
Present.
Councilwoman Durham?
Present.
Councilman Frank?
Here.
Councilman Bishop?
Present.
Councilman Nobby?
Here.
Councilwoman Montgomery?
Here.
Councilwoman Phillips?
Okay, we have a quorum. Okay, we'll go on down to new business, pending order 3462. This is the approval of the police contract. We had a committee, it consisted of Gabe Nobby, Diana Phillips, and Debbie Montgomery. So, Gabe, you want to take over here?
Basically, we went through a pretty lengthy negotiation period, and we come up with something that I think nobody really likes, and that means we got a good contract, because no one got exactly what we wanted, but we did come to agreement on it. It was passed by the FOP. Some of the highlights from it that you can kind of, you guys have seen this, but we changed the overcall, so there's an overcall or an overtime list, so it's not just one person with the highest seniority always getting overtime. So that should save the city some money. So as people who are newer also get the overtime, that overtime doesn't cost as much. Also with that, the chief and the assistant chief will be the first and second person on the overtime list, so they will be able to work overtime shifts. They won't be paid as overtime; that'll be part of their salary. So that's part of it. We changed 2 holidays, birthday and hire date holidays, and replace them as floating holidays. Just basically change the name. We capped the accumulated sick days to 120. And there was, what was there? Help me out here, ladies. Was there 3 that were over the 120?
4 of them.
4 over 120. And what that was doing was causing us huge payouts
When they
when they retire, and that's something that was really hurtful to us. So we try to limit that. We added a few extra personal days, and we moved them from, I can't remember what the exact name was. What was it? Personal. They had 7 personal leave days, and we took those down to 4 personal days. So we got something there. Changed their clothing allowance, so it's $200, and took the remainder of that, put on their salary, which really didn't do much for us financially either way. And one of the big highlights are we changed insurance from retirees before January 2019. There's no changes. Employees before January 2019 will have the same pay as the active. So right now, to kind of put this in perspective, if a person were to retire today from the police force, they would pay 5% insurance until they hit the, was it 65, 67, whatever that age is, I can't remember. Now, starting from 2019 forward, they'll be paying the same as the active duty officers, which right now is 10%. So that's a little savings there. And then anyone that's hired after January 15th, when they retire, there'll be a 50-50 split on that one until they reach Medicare age, which I'll say was quite a bit. We got rid of the Me Too clause, which was basically the matching raise, and we're going to pay out the compensatory time quarterly instead of annually, so we don't have a big chunk taken out at once. And then some other things changed, added a little bit on the wage of 1% one time, and allowed the promotion eligibility for people with 3 years of experience with 1 year with CPD, because right now we have people that have leadership experience that maybe not have the required, I think was it 5?
3 years.
No, prior. Was it 5 or was it 3? I can't remember.
Well, let's see.
At any rate,
What the old one was.
now it is you have to work for CPD 1 year, but if you have experience with other police forces or other entities, like we have an officer that was a officer in the military, so obviously he's got some leadership experience. So that would count towards those years of experience. So if you were hired in, it'll take 1 year before you're able to take a leadership position.
If it's okay with you, Councilman,
Sure.
I'd like to just hit a couple of other things
Absolutely.
briefly.
Yep, if I miss something, let me know.
I think you get 95% of them. The other thing, along with getting rid of the Me Too clause, which caused some problems when we were trying to negotiate with the other departments.
Because, pardon me, but because of the times and the term Me Too is in the news, would it be?
Oh, absolutely. You know, that
better if
didn't
we
even
call
occur
it-
to me.
If-
That did not
could we
even
call
occur to me,
it-
absolutely.
Could we call it the matching raise?
Yes,
clause?
yes, absolutely. So, and I guess I should
you.
say, I'm here as your former full-time city attorney, and now I'm finishing up some projects. I'm Beth Butch, and we're finishing this up. And so when I said Me Too, what I'm referring to is there was a clause in the police contract that said if any other department of the city employees received a raise who were paid out of the general fund, the police would get that same percentage or amount of raise. And so that's the clause we're referring to. And so then, of course, when we would try to negotiate with any other department, we had to be concerned with the fact that the police then were always ahead of the game, so to speak, because they were entitled to a raise every time. So that was problematic, that's gone. The other thing is there is a clause in that same area of the contract, I think it's section 34.2. I don't know if you remember this or not, but your contract automatically renews unless you give notice. So you have retained the right in your new contract to give notice as long as you do it 60 days before July of every year to cancel the contract, and you have retained that right as well throughout every year of this contract, so you should just know that. The other thing with regard to, a lot of work was done trying to eliminate overtime, because that's been a persistent problem too. And so Councilman Nobby's absolutely correct. Calling in the chief and the assistant chief first would certainly alleviate that. They can accept or decline as they see fit, but I would assume that they would accept at least part of the time, so that will stop some of the overtime. But the other thing is the public safety concern, which we talked about, because if you go only based on seniority, then you have 1 or 2 policemen who take all or most of the overtime. And it is probably not in the interest of public safety to have one person working all the overtime all the time, as opposed to spreading that out among the different officers. So that's a public interest.
Excuse me, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Was Altman their representative from the union, David?
No, he represents the RWDSU.
Who was their rep?
Leo Blackwell, who's an attorney.
I don't think I've met him.
Well, they're in Indianapolis, and it's a firm that has represented police in all different kind of matters for years.
But he agreed to the overtime not by seniority, but
Yes.
by
Yeah.
choice?
Yes.
Yep.
And that passed. That the FOP has already voted on it.
Well, it is a seniority list, and
is.
once the top senior person accepts the overtime 10
10
times,
times.
he falls
Oh,
down to the
okay.
bottom.
And then it goes
Alright.
back to a
Number 2
rotate.
goes,
Okay,
and
that
then
makes better.
as soon
Alright.
as they accept 10 times, they will drop to the bottom.
Okay.
And that's per year.
And the reason why we went so many times is because if you try to do it every time, then that list becomes kind of out of whack. So
Unmanageable.
Yeah, it's unmanageable. So with that number of times, people who have seniority can still have that benefit if they choose to, and then that list becomes a little more manageable.
I just find it difficult that a union rep would agree to that.
They sure did.
Well, we
actually-
had a lot of give and take. We had
Yeah,
a lot of
I mean, I was
conversations about a lot of
surprised,
things.
It was a very good negotiation.
There was no hollering or screaming?
No, and he
or-
was a
I
good
wouldn't-
person to work with and very
Yeah, he was.
knowledgeable.
He was
I
very
liked
good,
him.
very good.
Yes, so it was
We always
productive.
left on good terms. It was good.
So the other thing, and your clerk treasurer had a lot to do with this, that one of the biggest, it's a drain, I mean, it's a thing that needs to be done, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but one of your biggest expenditures is the retiree benefits. So we had lots and lots of hours that were spent on trying to do something about that, and Councilman Nabi gave you a very good synopsis of all of that. I just want to make it clear that the biggest thing was probably the spouses also. Once the employee becomes Medicare eligible, which is 65, then the spouse also must find other insurance, and that's for people on into the future, not the police who've worked for years and planned around that, but for the new hires and the new people, so you're not going to have that liability
Right.
hanging out there in future years of having a spouse that's maybe 20 years or 15 years younger than the retiree who is still on the city insurance paying that very low rate for years and years. So what this does, what these changes do for the people who are hired after 1/1/19, where they pay 50% of the premiums when they retire and their spouses aren't eligible to stay on, you have saved lots and lots of money for future administrations for the city, so.
And one other thing I'd like to add to that too is when we changed it from the 5% to paying from paying 5% for your insurance to what the officer pays, we're looking at, I think it's 16, so correct me if I'm wrong, 16 officers in the next 5 years that are eligible for retirement. So that's gonna save quite a bit in the next few years, that we'd otherwise be paying, retirement or, health care costs.
Right, that's right. And then the last thing, and I don't know if you mentioned this or not, if you did, sorry, but third shift has been reduced in manpower from 4 officers to 3. So you have that savings as well. Councilman Nabi spoke a little bit about switching the clothing allowance over to pay. That is not a net financial loss to the city. The clothing allowance under the contract that expires at the end of this year is $1,300 per year. State law requires that you provide a clothing allowance at a minimum of $200 a year. So what they proposed and what we found to be reasonable was we took $1,100 of that clothing allowance and just shifted it from clothing allowance to wages. So the benefit though to the police is that increases their pay for their retirement purposes, which is not paid by the city, that's paid by the state. So that's why that was done. The city's paying out the same amount, but it's just shifted from clothing allowance to wages. And then in your section 2010 and section 20.1 of the contract, as was said, there were 7 personal leave days that were taken away. Then 4 were added back in under section 20.1, but that is still a net gain of 3 days to the city per officer. So that gets rid of quite a bit of the personal leave pay. So anyway, that's basically every change in a synopsis. There were a couple of things that weren't in compliance with the law that we changed. It's financial somewhat, but I think it was maybe oversight or error. The Affordable Care Act requires that you provide medical benefits after 90 days of full-time employment, and the old contract, and it was negotiated that way, said 1 year, and if we had done that, we would have been fined. So we caught that and we fixed that. The other thing is, if a complaint is sustained against a police officer, and by sustained I mean found to have merit or be credible, the old contract said that it would be retained in their personnel file for 1 year, and I looked at the state record retention laws, and that should be 10 years, so we changed that to 10 years, and they agreed to that. So other than that, those are the basic changes, and if you have any legal questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Your negotiating team, I think, did a very good job of representing the city as far as policy considerations of public safety, and you should probably address those questions to them.
Okay.
The 1,100 that came out of the clothing, back in past times, that usually, how the whole clothing allowance became, even though there's a minimum of 200, I think that, my understanding with other contracts is it went into a clothing allowance, or whatever it was called at the time, to avoid it being on the base rate or on the salary, correct? So that it didn't cost the perf? And
Well, I'm
also-
guessing, I wasn't here then, but I'm guessing that's why it was done.
And it also, because once you put it on the rate or on the salary, then any percentage rates, that,
Right,
yeah.
right.
It-
But what the city is paying versus the benefit that they receive it's a smaller ratio payment for the city versus the benefit they receive. So that is one of the various things we agreed to that enabled us to get the things in the
The
contract
other things.
that we thought were important,
Yeah.
like the removal of the one clause and the big change for the retiree benefits, which is gonna affect the city financially favorably.
Does that match IC code on the fire and police pensions on insurance when they retire? Or
I
there are-
believe that it does,
There are
yes.
IC codes that we can't change.
Yes,
for them.
I know it. Yes, I believe that it does.
I have a question on item 17. Gabe, I'll address this to you if I may. It says a maximum of 4 part-time officers changed to a maximum of 10. I think that's great, but how is that going to be rationed out? I mean, are they going to just go pursue 10 more officers and try to keep them on the roll?
That's
Or how
really
we
a
gonna
management
pay
decision.
for it, or?
It's a management decision. Right now, I don't think they have enough to fill the 4. But that way, if there is that potential to have 10, they can do that. So it's another tool in the management toolbox to allow them to have flexibility to manage as they see fit.
I think it's a great idea, but how are they going to pay for it? Do I need to talk to Carol about that, or?
It'd be the same way we pay for part-time now.
Yeah, but you going to carry all 10 of them on roll?
No.
If you
No,
got
no,
10?
only if they work.
We only pay
Only
them
if
They're
if they work.
part-time, they only
I
get
understand.
paid as they work.
Yeah, so there's no money exchange unless, or money going out.
That's a
unless they-
definite win,
Yeah.
if
I
you can
agree.
find 10.
Yeah, but I just wondered if,
Well, then you got recruitment. I mean,
Yeah,
you've got-
and you're
That's
paying
my
far
potential.
less, well, I can't remember the exact number, but it's a lot less than if we're paying overtime for
Oh, I
one of
definitely
our
agree.
current officers.
It
I'm
is.
just concerned about the finances of it, and that's great if we can get that many. Thank you.
I have a question, when, just for like the record, when was that, Me Too, when did that happen last time? When did
It
we
was in the
have
last
to-
contract. It was added in the last contract.
Okay, and what kind of raise was that?
Well, they got 96 cents because the, and this is right before I became city attorney, the street department got a raise, so then the police filed a grievance to get their raise, which I told the mayor, under the terms of this contract, I believe they would win that grievance, so we paid that raise.
Okay.
Okay, is there any more discussion?
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
And I think I've somewhat answered my own question on one of them, on item 1, page 6, article 4. The changing working conditions. As I read that very last paragraph, I'm guessing that the definition of this is probably too numerous to put in here. So
Yes.
So it's kind of more of a catch-all.
Well, I'll tell you what,
Right.
Dave, that's a great question. That's something we worked through a lot.
Yeah.
We spent hours on that. So yeah, we were pinning down to pretty exact things, but then they become numerous, and then they become kind of too numerous and too specific, and so that way we left it the way it is, so that.
I thought that might be so numerous that a general statement is probably,
We found that
Work
out
it
the
out
hard
later.
way. We did. We tried to become specific, and we thought that we were painting ourselves into a corner, and we would be better off to just interpret that as it comes up.
sure.
Yeah.
The other thing is items 8 and 9, I think they relate to each other. It's on page 28, Article 20. I'm find it myself here. And I may have answered this myself after studying it further. You have a maximum of 120 days that could be accumulated. And then it says that those that are over and above, how they will be paid. I thought if you got a maximum of 120, how to get over and above. Well, I
Yes.
assume that if you have 120 at the time when you
Yes.
gained additional, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Then you can accumulate that additional, the additional has to be paid out.
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly right. There was 4 officers, is that correct?
Yes.
They already had substantially more than that, so they had to be paid out there, and then
Okay.
the remain at 120.
So that always stays no more than 120.
That's right.
Okay,
That's the way I looked into that too, Dave. Good question.
okay.
Okay, is there any more discussion? Any more questions for Gabe or Beth? If not, I'll entertain a motion to pass on first reading.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass pending ordinance 3462 on first reading. All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Is there a motion to suspend the rule and go to third and final reading?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules. All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, we'll go on to third and final reading. I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second to pass pending ordinance 3462 on third and final reading.
You gonna do roll call?
Want to do roll call? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote.
Councilman Bishop,
Yes.
Councilman Nabi,
Yes.
Councilwoman Montgomery,
Yes.
Councilman Nettie,
Yes.
Councilwoman Durham,
Yes.
Councilman Frank.
No.
Okay. What is that, 5-1? We have 5-1, it passed. So we do have a contract with the police department. Okay, we can't discuss anything else, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion second to adjourn. All in favor, say by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Adjourn.
I'm gonna have her